I'm not mad at Patreon. I'm just disappointed. A mismatch between rhetoric and action isn't surprising to me, but I would think that a company that's literally by creator for creators would be more keen on catering to the needs of independent artists. I figured some of Jack Conte's insights into the struggles of independent creation would have informed the function of the platform, and I certainly won't condemn Patreon now. Still a young company, it can change, but I hope it does soon, because as someone who isn't an independent artist, I see a lot of flaws and ways to improve. So, let's see if they take my advice.
Patrons. Patreon.
Patreon.
Patreon. The Patreon.
It's
Patreon.com.
Patreon.
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 It's like having a salary.
The artist shan't make money.
Really expensive for us. And resource intensive.
This isn't actually super cheap to make. And it's working. It's not like perfect yet, but it's really working.
Jack, it's good to have you. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Let's rock.
Being an artist on Patreon seems to be a perfect solution to independent creators' problems. And honestly, anyone making money on Patreon is earning more from their work than they would without Patreon. However, just because Patreon makes a sustainable living income possible does not mean it's probable. Building a following on any platform can be difficult, but accumulating patrons will be even more difficult. Look at the Lessons from the Screenplay YouTube channel. They get hundreds of thousands of views from 1.3 million subscribers, but they only have 800 some patrons offering $2,000 per video. Compare them to Just Right, a YouTube channel getting similar views per video but only getting half the subscribers, and they only have 300 some patrons offering $700 per video. Patreon can give you a direct wage, but it's only going to be a living wage if you're a creator that is able to accumulate enough views that become subscribers that become patrons, which is kinda an uncertain and unpredictable trend anyway. Patronage is tough for consumers too. I subscribe to many artists on many platforms, but I only have the means to support 2 on Patreon, and I only give them $1 a month. And I'm the guy that believes it's my obligation to support the creators I love. Another issue with Patreon is that of wage guarantees. There is nothing preventing me from withdrawing my patronage without forewarning. Monthly income is not guaranteed to be the same each month. Even if dramatic fluctuations are uncommon or unlikely, it's a weakness in the model. Another pain for creators is the additional work of running themselves as a small business. Many creators work other jobs to supplement their income, and the work of running a Patreon is that of being an entrepreneur anyway. Instead of just working on their art, which is legitimate work already, creators spend time running their Patreon as a small business, marketing, publicizing, and distributing their work. And also, without set working hours, this brings up the major issue of overwork. Even if art is their passion, which is not an excuse to ask someone to work more hours, are these creators able to raise families, develop other skills, travel, socialize, or just take a break? I guess without much grace, Patreon also doesn't offer creators healthcare, a union for protecting their interests in the palm of a massive tech company, or a pension system. Patreon may be willing to share the success stories from their platform, but it's hard to quantify how many artists are putting in the work but not making a sustainable income, overworking themselves, and or feeling the absence of healthcare and other social securities. These problems with the Patreon model are very challenging for me. They worry me greatly. I worry about the creators I love and support. I worry about Patreon's future getting worse instead of better. I worry about how these problems reflect the broader platform economy. The rights of workers I outlined were predominantly developed for workers in a wage labor system that featured a clearly defined worker-employer dynamic. Now, with Patreon and the larger gig economy, workers are less and less able to demand protection from employers, and many aren't considered employees anyway. Even so, I do have some ideas for improving the Patreon model, making it more inclusive and forgiving for smaller artists. Before I share them, I think it's important to say that corporate Patreon should want to make these improvements. As long as creators succeed and make more money, so will Patreon. If Patreon were to promote a more creator-friendly platform, more creators would be drawn to it. If Patreon were to promote more creator successes, they would be making more money. But right now, it seems that expansion and private investments mark company success. But there are only so many independent creators in the world, and only so much private money. So until that stops working, consider these pro-worker improvements. A creator union. This would allow creators solidarity amongst each other, collaboration if desired, and most importantly, a unified voice to communicate with Patreon as a company. Decision-making power. Creators not only need a voice, they need power to maintain their own interests. Progressive fees. The percentage of money taken by Patreon should be adjusted to match the monetary success of each account. They shouldn't have to lose as much as the Patreon account making 6 figures. No tax on low-income creators. If a Patreon account is making below a certain amount of money monthly, it should not be taxed by Patreon. This especially should invite new creators into Patreon's system. Again, as long as Patreon is making millions as middlemen between creators and their fans, they should be actively inviting and supporting creators, giving them an environment to do dignified work and receive just remuneration. The platform economy can sound enticing, proclaiming self-employment, flexible schedules, and extra sources of income. However, I don't think turning every extraneous skill and every odd hour of the day into a source of income is that freeing, especially when the freedom of the platform economy is at the expense of actual employee benefits and securities. Patreon represents this changing economy and an emerging labor force that needs protection. We should be vigilant in examining the progression of this economic shift and how companies are treating their employees. I see a trend of companies distancing themselves from the responsibilities they have to the workers that make them profitable, and an exhaustion and exacerbation in the platform economy's workforce. If this economic shift is going to be productive and sustainable, it's going to be because average people see themselves as indirect employers, as people with responsibility for creating an economic system that's based on the respect of the dignity of workers. And if Patreon really is going to usher in a second renaissance, it will only be because they took the side of the independent creators. Cut.
Easy.